We have been learning about virtual private clouds, and I've already mentioned a concept called VPC peering. Now we're ready to dive a little deeper into that. But I want to begin by really just talking about what it's all about and why we might use it in the first place. So imagine, for example, that you have a virtual private cloud for sales and a virtual private cloud for marketing. And every now and then, the servers in the sales VPC need to access resources in the marketing VPC and vice versa. Well, in order for that to happen, you've got to figure out some way to open a channel of communications between them. Because normally, VPCs can't talk directly with other VPCs as a default. So we've got to have some method to link them together so that they can connect. This is what we call VPC peering. Now, if you step back and think about just the real world for a moment, imagine that your company has acquired another company. And that company has their network and your company has your network. And you want the two networks to be able to connect together so that you can begin to collaborate and work together as one holistic company. Many times we would do that by simply building a WAN connection between the two companies and then sharing federated access through Active Directory or some kind of a solution like that. But whatever the method was, we would connect them with a WAN connection. So you can think of VPC peering kind of like building a WAN connection between two virtual private clouds. Now, the important thing to know is then, simply stated, a VPC connects with another VPC using peering. That's what peering ultimately is, connecting one VPC to another. So think of some scenarios like there's a management virtual private cloud that needs to connect to a production virtual private cloud, or a development virtual private cloud that needs to connect to a production virtual private cloud, or a corporate VPC with some partner company's VPC. Now, there's an important thing to understand about VPC peering, and that is that it is not transitive. Now, this can be a little hard to understand, so let me illustrate this with a graphic. What we're dealing with here is, in this case, a sales VPC, a marketing VPC, and one that we're just calling VPC2. So here's the concept. If sales is paired with VPC2 and VPC2 is paired with marketing, then that does not mean that sales can communicate with marketing or marketing can communicate with sales. In order for marketing and sales to communicate, there must be peering between them directly. This is what I mean when I say VPC peering is not transitive. So if VPC1 is paired with VPC2 and VPC2 is paired with VPC3, that doesn't mean that VPC1 can talk to VPC3. They're not transitive, they don't pass through. You have to have direct peering connections between them. So management VPC paired with production VPC, development VPC paired with production VPC, corporate VPC paired with partner VPC. All of these can be done, but understand that if we want everybody to trust everybody, there has to be peering among these different virtual private clouds. That's very important to understand. Now, let's talk about creating our VPC peers, the basic process we go through. Initiating VPCs will send a request to the receiving VPCs. So you have to start it somewhere, right? And you start it on one end, whichever one you choose to start it on, and the other becomes the receiver. So for example, if you have the sales VPC and the marketing VPC, the sales could initiate or marketing could initiate. Doesn't matter which one, but one of them must be the initiator. And then the other becomes the receiver. In order to initiate the peering, you must be the owner of the VPC. So you can't do this if you're just some other user. It has to be the owner. Just an administrator cannot do it. It has to be the owner. So there's just that one individual that can make this happen. Also know that your IP classless interdomain routing blocks in each VPC cannot overlap. Because if they overlap, how are you really going to route between them? You've got the same IPs in both VPCs. So the first thing you'll do before you ever start up peering is make sure that you have different IP address blocks in the two VPCs that are going to be paired with each other. So this makes me step back and say, let's just have a best practice when working in AWS. And that is never use the same CIDR block in a different VPC. All of your VPCs should have their own unique CIDR block. Now you can see them within the AWS Management Console. There's not really an easy single place to go to see all of them. So I would encourage you to get an Excel spreadsheet if you're going to have a lot of virtual private clouds and track it. So you know every time you create a new VPC, you're creating a new CIDR block. And remember, the simple way to say that is a new IP subnet. So you have to have a different subnet in each VPC in order for them to be peered with each other. Now, once the initiator sends the request for peering, the receiving VPC accepts that request. But remember, it's still only the owner that can accept it. So the owner initiates it on one VPC, then the owner of the other VPC receives it. This is the way we set up the peers. Now, it's also important to know that each VPC needs a defined route to the other VPC. So this might require routing table modifications that might be created for you during the process of setting it up. But it's important to know that there needs to be a route through that peer that's configured. So think of the peer, again, like a WAN connection between the two VPCs. Just because that WAN connection exists doesn't mean that communications from one VPC will be able to get through to the other. There has to be a route that gets you there, just like with any other IP networks that we build. Also, we can have security group rules, and they may require modification for the VPC peers. So the security group, remember in AWS, is not what we normally think of as a security group. And we're going to get to them in more depth a little bit later on in this chapter. A security group in AWS is like a firewall rule, deciding what can go in or out of an instance. So you might have to have new rules that are set up so that you can actually get the communications to work across the peering link. These are all things you have to think about when you're setting up a VPC peering structure. Now, we're going to look at it in the next episode and see how we actually set up our VPC peers. But for now, in summary, the thing you need to grasp about this is the peering itself is like a WAN connection between two locations. It's just that the two locations are two virtual locations in the cloud. They're your two virtual private clouds. Always remember that peering is not transitive. So if one VPC is peered with another VPC, which in turn is peered with another, that doesn't mean the first VPC can get all the way through to the last one. There has to be peering between each pair of VPCs for the communications to work. So if you keep those things in mind, you're off to a good start in establishing the peering between your virtual private clouds.